You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Yes, do you listen to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, Your Majesty?
Oh yes, most definitely, one has. Well, it'd be a very dull world otherwise, wouldn't it?
Welcome to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Your hosts are Philip Kinsella and Ronald of Twin Souls Radio. A very warm welcome to all our listeners. Both Ronnie and I are proud to present our next guest, Calvin Parker, who experienced one of the world's most famous UFO encounters, which Calvin, along with his best friend Charles Hickson, experienced on the 11th of October 1973. Both Calvin and Charles had been fishing out at Pascagoula River in Mississippi when an event of so horrifying changed their lives forever. World-renowned UFO investigators Dr. James Harder and Dr. J. Allen Hynek personally investigated the case, and Calvin has just released his own book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story, by Flying Disc Press. Calvin is here to tell us his story in his words. Hello, Calvin.
Hey, how are y'all?
Yeah, we're fine, thank you very much. So, I want to ask, I know that you were 19 years of age when you and your best buddy went out fishing. And I've got to ask, can you take us from that moment, what actually happened that day that changed the rest of your life?
I can. I had just moved to the coast and went to work for the F.B. Walker and Son shipyard, which is where Charles Hickson was working, and hired me. So that was my first day of work. Mm-hmm. So he said when we got off work, let's go fishing to wind down. It was October, and for an October day, it was hot.
Yeah.
So we decided to go fishing and wind down just a little bit and cool off before we went home and ate, and took a shower and all. Mm-hmm. So we did. We ran by his apartment, picked up some fishing equipment, and went down to the old Shaw Peters shipyard. And it's an abandoned shipyard, just to kind of set the scene there. It had been out of business for a while, but the pier that they had was still there, and that's what we was going to fish on. It used to be an old grain elevator over there, mm-hmm. and where they unload the grain off the ships, and it would fall off into the water, and then the fish would bite. So to make a long story short, we drove to this Shaw Peters shipyard, and we got out, and I noticed the big mess that was there, where it had been abandoned for a while, and it was really hard to walk through all that to get to the where we was going to fish, because the marsh grass was high, and they had thrown a lot of trash out, but we did make it down. It took about 15 minutes to work our way down. So we was sitting on the pier, and as I was looking out across the water, there was a ship on the other side, a big Coast Guard boat. And I was thinking to myself, this is made out of steel. How does something made out of steel float?
Yeah.
And about that time, I seen some blue lights. And in Mississippi, the patrol cars, the police cars, have blue lights when they flash and they come across. You can see them for a long ways. Mm-hmm. But I was looking across the water, and the blue lights was behind us and reflecting off of the water in that ship on the other side. And I said, well, the law is here to make us move. But as I stood up and turned around to see what was going on back there, just being nosy, I guess. Then a bright light appeared, real bright. And what I figured out is when the door opened on the craft, it was, the lights were so bright that it almost blinded you there for a minute.
Right.
So Charlie had stood up and turned around about that same time too, and you couldn't really see nothing right then coming out. But as they got about halfway to us, you could make out it was some kind of something coming for us or coming toward us, and like I say, we wasn't for sure if it was people or what it was. So as it got a little closer, then it was clear, what the things were. It was a kind of a gray-looking mechanical. Now, they moved like a mechanical being would move.
Yes.
And I call them the big ugly ones, but they got a hold of my shoulder, and immediately when one got a hold of me and two got a hold of Charlie, but immediately when they got me on the shoulder, I just relaxed. It was almost like passing out, but your eyes was open and you was conscious of what was going on, but you couldn't move. You was more or less just paralyzed. And they lifted us off the ground a couple of foot. And I remember thinking, I had my thoughts about me, and I had my vision, but I couldn't turn my head to look to see if I could see Charlie or anything. And I was wondering, how could they do this without breaking my arm? But anyhow, it didn't do any good to fight. And we just kind of glided over the top of that marsh grass that was there. I figured we was a couple of foot over it. And then we got to the craft, and I could tell, it was really bright inside. And they walked us in the door, and I caught myself looking for some light fixtures or something, trying to see where all the light was coming from. But there weren't any. I mean, it was coming out of the walls, it kind of illuminating out of the walls like it was painted in there or something.
Yes.
So the one that had me, I couldn't see Charlie because I couldn't turn around to either side and turn my head or anything. All I could see was just what was straight in front of me. And we made a left turn, and then he made a little right turn into an office. And they laid me on a table, or what I believe was a table. I didn't feel nothing under me, and I didn't see nothing there when I went inside the building. But they put me on about a 45-degree angle, and I laid back, and I was real relaxed then, but I was still conscious of what was going on. And there was something that come out of the ceiling about the size of a deck of cards, and it got on each side of my head. When it come down in the middle of my eyes, and it said click. Come down on the right-hand side, and it said click. So it made a circle, and it clicked about 4 times, and then it went back up in the ceiling. It went click, click, click. So it's some kind of I figured it to be some kind of medical device or something.
Do you think, Calvin, do you think that at this point here, were the beings that took you, the one that had a hold of your arm, I know that your mate was taken by 2, but can you give a description of these entities? Because I know that you said within your book they seemed to float, and you indeed floated with them. What was your overall feeling at the time, before and during your relaxed state? What did you pick up from these beings?
Well, it was 2 different ones when we got on. Now the one that brought me aboard the craft or the vessel, it was probably 4.5, 5 foot tall, real stocky looking, but it was mechanical moving. It didn't seem like real. You know how something kind of moved like it's a machine?
Yes.
And that's the way this was moving. And that was really confusing to me because it seemed all mechanical. I figured it was a soldier or something, and I couldn't tell if it had skin or that was a suit, but it was kind of a gray, wrinkled looking. If it was a suit or skin, I couldn't feel any texture in the skin. I guess that might be because I was kind of paralyzed there.
Yeah.
Now, that little thing come down and click. There's another one come out then. Now, this one looked to be more, I'm trying to think of a good word for it, humanoid, like a human, or not a human, but more of...
more taking on the shape of a humanoid rather than the robots.
Exactly right. Yeah. And kind of feminine, so I'm not for sure if it was a male or female or what it was. I did, I couldn't turn my head and really get a good look, but when they bent over, I looked to see if I could see breast or something like that, and I couldn't tell. It just looked like there was nothing nowhere. Now, she or it reached in her hands and grabbed me by the mouth and the nose and pinched my skin on the side of my cheek and put their finger kind of up in my mouth and pulled around on my nose a little bit. And I didn't have no feelings from their skin. I couldn't tell any temperature changes. I couldn't tell anything about it. You would think that you could feel some changes. Yeah. But I do remember I was starting to come out of the whatever they had gave me, if anything, which I know they did. It was kind of wearing off, and I was getting a little frightened and a little bit scared. And I was thinking, maybe I could take this one. I might be able to grab her or it, because it was a good deal smaller and not built as bulky as that big one, and run out the door with her. But about that time when I was thinking that, it kind of made like a little mumble, and it said noon, and the big one kind of come back in, but it looked at me, and it was just like it was talking to me, except it was telepathic.
Yes.
It said, don't worry, don't be afraid, we're not going to hurt you. And for some reason, I just settled down then. I mean, I guess it was good just to hear that they didn't have nothing bad on their mind at the time. And it seemed more like a physical exam, and I would just about bet if it was that this one was a doctor that would come in. But immediately when she got through, or Ed got through with whatever they was doing, this one turned and went back the other way. Now, I couldn't see if it went into a room or through a door or got behind something, because I couldn't turn my head again. And then the big ugly one come in and grabbed me by the arm, floated us right back out to the river, exactly where they had put me out, set me down, and I was still kind of paralyzed just a second, and I had my arms stretched out toward the river. And that's when I heard Charlie, Calvin, you okay? Son, you okay? And I come to just long enough to turn around and look and see the lights, the bright light close, then the little blue flickering lights was still there a little bit, and it just shot up and disappeared into the air. And that was the beginning of everything.
Yeah, wow, that really is an incredible journey and experience. And the other thing as well that we'll get to in a little while is that Dr. Harder and Dr. Jalen Hynek, two prominent ufologists, came and immediately to come and to assess you and basically to report that the case is genuine. But going back, Calvin, there's a few things I need to ask you. First of all,
yes, sir.
With regards to the other entity that was seen, or you had some feeling that it perhaps may well have been female, and a lot more diminutive than ourselves as humans, and obviously, did it look like a grey at all, or was it more humanized?
I believe it would be more humanized than I've seen pictures of And up until, this here lately, I never really paid no attention to any pictures, nothing. Yeah. But I've seen pictures on Facebook where people had put up pictures of what they said was grays, with the big eyes and all. This one didn't have big eyes. It had smaller eyes, more like human eyes, and kind of a little slit for a mouth and a nose and ears. Everything looked kind of normal that way. But I figured on the eyes, I was thinking, if it had big eyes, it would be blinding in there because, the pupils of the eyes would be real big. So, anyhow, it was more human looking than anything, except for the skin.
Right, and the other thing, Calvin, is that this entity or the humanoid being who had examined you, obviously for yourself as a young guy, was very traumatic and very disorientating, especially because you were more concerned for your mate as well, your best mate, about where he was and what was going on with him. Did you see anything else within the craft, or was it just light, other than the small cigarette-type blue box that came down with the clicking sounds that obviously was taken or used as some form of medical procedure, as an X-ray, I suppose, or a medical procedure to see, how you worked and what was going on? Was there anything else in the room other than that and the light and the being?
All I could see, and if I could have turned my head, I might have been able to see a little more and all, but all I could see was just the walls and that little thing when I was laying on my back coming out of the ceiling. And it's strange because when it went back up in the ceiling, you couldn't tell there was anything there. I don't know if it might have just faded in, kind of an optical illusion deal, or they might have had an opening, pulled it up in there. But it kind of a plain looking room. I didn't see any control panels, no light switches, and I did look for that. I even looked for plug-ins for electricity, but then I got to thinking, that's what humans would have. They probably so far advanced they wouldn't have something like this. If it.
Yeah, sure. After the event, when you were, when they performed their experiments and that you had actually been disembarked from the craft, we got to that part then. Can you tell us what happened afterwards with you and Charlie?
Yes, sir. We was on the pier, and he said, Charlie actually said, let's talk for a minute. Let's sit down and talk about this. I really wanted just to get out of there, but I wasn't able to drive. Was over there in my car, and that's the one we was in. I really didn't care to drive nowhere right then, but I didn't want to stay there either. So we sat there and talked. Charlie says, well, I got to go call somebody. I said, Charlie, don't call nobody. It's nobody's business. If they wanted everybody to know, they would have picked everybody up along with us. I said, let's just not tell nobody and get up and go to work. He said, no, I got to call somebody. He said, I'm going to call Keesler when I get out of here. And Keesler is the Air Force base that's in a little town about 25 miles from where we were. So I told him, I said, well, you can call them, but don't tell them I had anything to do with it. And but he called, and they said, well, Mr. Hickson, or he told him his name, what he'd seen. They said, well, we don't deal with this anymore. We quit dealing with this back in the 60s. Of course, this was just 73. And for you to call the local authorities. So that's what he did. He hung up from them. He called the local sheriff department down here, and they sent a patrol car out with 2 people in it. And when they got here, they immediately looked in our car to see what was going on, to see if we'd been drinking or anything, give us a field sobriety test to make sure that we was sober. So and I'm glad they did all that back in. And then they told us to follow them to the sheriff department. So we got in a car and followed them back to the sheriff department, and they put us in separate rooms and interrogated us. Then they put us in one room together, and both of them left out. And that's where I didn't realize it, or Charlie didn't, where they had the tape recorder in there, and they was taping us. So they listened to her, and that's where what they call the secret tape come from. And I never heard of the secret tape until here lately. Because when I left, I didn't keep up with all this. I just
wanted to get on with your life.
Fell.
Yeah.
And that's all I wanted. So anyhow, in a few minutes, the head sheriff come out, and he told us, he said, y'all go on home, do whatever you want to. I said, okay. So the next day, we ended up going to work, got up the same time in the morning. We went to work at the shipyard where we was working, and I noticed it was more cars there than normal. And I didn't think nothing about it, but the press had got a hold of this somehow. And till this day, I really don't know the truth about how they did. But I'm feeling like maybe there was back then there wasn't cell phones or computers, so they might have had a scanner, a handheld scanner, and be listening to the sheriff department, fire departments, and things like that. And that's the only thing I could think of.
Yes. So the other thing as well is that I know that you know, Dr. Harder and Dr. Hynek came over. Now that is some real intense stuff. I mean, for these guys to get to hear about your story from you and Charles, for them to come over, because you were interviewed with them for 4 hours, weren't you, between the two doctors?
Yes, sir. And I mean, they was down immediately.
Yeah.
And what was amazing to me was they came on their own money. I mean, they didn't get paid to come down there and talk to us. They funded their own trips and came down and did their own investigations, talked to us, both of us, separately and together. And then they came to the conclusions, you know, that they really felt like it was a legitimate deal. And after that, while they was down, they also sent us to the local hospital here to be checked out. And then we was checked also for radiation through Keesler Air Force Base. But while we was at the hospital, they noticed a mark on my arm that looked like a puncture mark and a little cut. And that's where one of them had got a hold of me. And I felt like that was the puncture mark there where they did an injection or something to keep us calm.
That's incredible. So the other thing, Calvin, is that I know that, you know, this case is world famous, and that Charles, your mate, had written his own book on the actual experience, and that you had been basically, your wife had got you to write this new book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story. So I want to ask also that with regards to the event and also after the event itself, initially afterwards, what was it like? I mean, how you just wanted a normal life, and yet this whole encounter literally ripped your life apart. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Well, first thing that happened was I had a new car, and my car was messed up. It wasn't running right. The windows were shattered out on the passenger side, the side facing the craft. I went to work the next day. They told us, y'all just too disruptive to have y'all around. We got the media. We can't conduct business in the office. Y'all can't go out on the yard work because people want to talk to you. So we're going to pay y'all to take off some time, and you know, maybe things would get back to normal. Well, I knew I wasn't going to stay down. I worked there one day, and I said, well, shoot, I'm not going to stay down here. So when we got through with what we had to do, the hospital, the radiation, talking to Dr. Heineck and Dr. Harder. I went and got my car and left, and I went back to home to Laurel, Mississippi. And then that's when I thought I was going to explain it to my family. But, up until up until I had wrote this book, I never even talked to my family about it or my friends. I got a few friends. They never asked me about it. My family never asked me because they didn't want to upset me about it and all. And then the only person I ever talked to about it was Bud Hopkins, and he hypnotized me and pulled some information out.
Yeah, I mean that's an incredible, experience for you, because you're just a normal guy just doing his work, and then all of a sudden you have something happen to you at the age of 19 that changes and shatters your whole perception of reality. It turns up your life. But what I want to ask also, Calvin, is that with regards to the UFO event that you went through, Charlie, what did he actually experience himself? What did he go through? I know that you were obviously separated within the craft through the initial contact. Did he explain anything to you about what happened?
Charlie and I never talked about it. When we was together after that, it was just briefly going to work, and neither one of us said nothing to each other going to work the next morning. We stopped, we eat breakfast, and then when I left the Mississippi Gulf Coast and went back to my other home, I didn't want to see Charlie. I didn't want to see nothing to do. I didn't want nothing to do with this UFO stuff. And the reporters had kept coming and looked me up everywhere I was working. So I finally just bought a travel trailer, and I hit the road, and I'd find me a job, and I'd work there, and I'd do this and that until somebody found out who I was, and then I'd leave again. So it just turned my life over. I was planning on being an average person, working at, average job, retiring, paying for a house all my life and a car, and retired with very little. So, but all that changed.
Now, the other thing, Calvin, is that previous to this, I mean, you didn't really have any interest in UFOs, did you?
No, sir. No, I had no clue what one was.
No, and I want to ask as well. So, in retrospect to the experience that you had, Calvin, and since that time, have you had time to reflect or wonder why this happened to you? Did you have a feeling that they would return or come back at any point?
I did. I really felt like it. And I did. I reflected on this every day of my life. It's like losing somebody you love. I mean, you think about them every day in some little way. And this is the same thing. It's not a day of my life that's gone by that I hadn't really thought about this So
yeah, and with regards to Charlie, I mean, this normally within UFO cases, I mean, you find this. I mean, we had another great guy on called Terry Lovelace who wrote Incidents at Devil's Den, and he had the same thing happen where he had an experience, and he was out with a good friend of his, and after the experience that he didn't want anything to do with his friend, and they didn't want to talk about the story. So it seems to be a theme that's constantly recurring throughout, when you have experiences with, two people in the experience rather than sometimes the one person that's going through the experience, which is very different. Betty and Barney Hill, their abduction in America in 1961, both of them were abducted, and they were at odds against each other about their beliefs and the way they saw things, and they didn't want to talk about it. Barney definitely didn't. So this is quite a common theme with regards to these types of experiences, because you have obviously changed from the experience.
Oh, it definitely changed me. And I went and spent some time with Betty Hill. I spent probably 4 or 5 days with her and enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, tell us.
We didn't really. Charlie was going to do a TV show, and actually I did want to talk to other people that had been abducted, somebody besides Charlie. And he asked if I'd go. I said, no, I don't care nothing about going to be on TV. And he said, well, there's somebody that's going to be there that wants to talk to you. It's Betty Hill. And I didn't know who Betty Hill was, but I said, okay. So I flew to Chicago with him. And while he was doing his little TV thing there, I got to meet Betty Hill, and we got to talking. So she invited me to her home. She said, would you come spend some time with me? And let me tell you why I decided to spend some time with her. Because I really believed her when she was telling me, because back in the 60s, a black man didn't marry a white woman, or a white woman didn't marry a black man here in the States. It just wasn't, it was unheard of. It just didn't happen. And if you did, you didn't want everybody to know it or didn't tell everybody. You just kind of kept to yourself. And that's the reason I knew she didn't want the publicity. So I knew she was legitimate when she was talking about it. So I went and spent some time with Betty, and we talked, we visited. The first 2 days I was there, we just sat down and talked about what happened, and she explained to me what happened to her. I explained what happened to me, and then we went to up on a mountain somewhere where she says that she goes frequently and has sightings and stuff. Now, we went there, and I didn't see nothing there, but a shooting star, I think. But she says she goes there pretty regular, and I do. I think she's real legitimate about everything.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no doubt within our minds that the Betty and Barney Hill case, as your case as well, to many other cases like them, are very real experiences, and ordinarily these encounters change you as an individual completely and utterly. And I think there's a sense also of discovering more about ourselves, of what we are, who we are, where we come from, why we're here. And even though you, as the abductee, as it's known, have gone through such a horrifying experience, I think more times than not afterwards it seems you kind of like it makes more sense to you. Does that make sense to you also, Calvin? Like, it seems to make more sense a long time afterwards when you've had time to reflect over the experience?
Oh, it does make a lot of sense. And like I say, it's not a day that goes by that I don't think about it or reflect on it a little bit. And especially here lately, Philip is a great person. I mean, and he's really the reason I did the book, because he called, and it just happened to be my wife and I was talking on the way home, and he had got a hold of trying to get a hold of me through an email and stuff, and wanted my phone number to talk. So I gave him my number, and he called, and he said, Calvin, look, I don't know if he called about me writing a book. I don't think it was. But he said, look, if you write a book, it's your legacy. It's documented. The press can't come in and change it then. It's black and white. It's in writing. And that made a lot of sense to me, and that's one of the reasons I went ahead and did a book. That way, I figured, put it in a book, and that's it. That's the way that it is.
Yeah, and I have to tell our listeners as well that your book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story by Calvin Parker, and forward by Philip Mantrell, published by Flying Disc Press. I urge the listeners to go out and buy a copy, because it is a really beautiful book, and I really can and did empathize with you, Calvin, about you can you can almost feel as though you're there, because you write it as though you're there. And I know that there is a lot of amazing illustrations and press cuttings, and I also have to smile when I go to the section in the book with regards to the figures that they made of the initial robots that had, the three of them that had come for you and your friend, because they look kind of scary.
Yeah, they are scary now. And you know, I gotta hand one thing to Philip on there. He knew how I felt about changing things, and he has pretty much just left a book. I'm just a old uneducated redneck country boy, and I put this book down. I said, well, you know, it'll never go no further than a printing press. It probably won't even make that. But I'd send a chapter to him, and he'd go through it, and he'd tell me, well, you need to tell them a little more about this and a little more. He said, they can't see it. You have to tell them in words what they're looking at. So I tried to put a description in and tell exactly what was going on. And he left it like it was. He didn't edit it to make it look like I was smart or nothing, because I'm not. He put it in my words, and that's what I like about Philip.
Yeah, and I've got to tell you, Calvin, also that first of all, you're not just a redneck country boy. You are a human being. You're obviously here for a reason or a purpose that most people can't yet see. But Philip Mantle is very much a person who is a shining example of bringing stories and wonderful things to the general public. And he's a great guy also. So my hat's off to Philip Mantle. I'm so pleased also that he was able to get you to bring out your story in your words, because I know that this is something that you've kept secret within yourself for many, many years. And I know the book's it's a bestseller on Amazon. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, sir. It was #1 bestseller for a long time. Now Kindle is out in Kindle, and that's #1, and the book is #2 bestseller.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. So also, within the actual story, that your story, my story, you call it, I know that the experience itself was very horrifying for you and your friend, but when you've read the book and you take a step back, you're always wondering, why did they do this to you? Why did this happen to you? And do you ever have a feeling that this may be something that has happened to you in the past, in your childhood, or something like this?
I do. I feel like it has. I have. I do have memories. When I was a kid, about the time that President Kennedy was assassinated, and that's the timeline, I'm trying to keep up with. Might not have been exactly the same time, but my brother and I used to share a room together because we lived in a small house, so we slept in the same room in there and all. And he would tell me, and he was a dead serious type person. I mean, he said, I wake up at night and you got a ghost or something talking to you in your ear and all. And then one night I heard something blowing in my ear, and I was wide awake then, and I turned around, and it scared me. And since then, I got kind of paranoid. But then later during life, after this that happened to us in '73, I went on a fishing trip. Told my wife, I said, I'm going to the islands, I'm going to fish, and then I'll be back before dark. And this is how Bud Hopkins come into the picture.
Yes.
So I went out and I was fishing. She made me a lunch, and it takes about a little while to get out to where I was fishing. So I took my boat and left and went out there. While I was out there, I noticed it was getting close to dinner time because I was getting a little hungry. I said, well, I'll just eat my lunch while I'm fishing, and then I'll turn and go home. So I started eating that. I thought I did, rather, and next thing I knew, it was 3-4 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And I woke up and my lunch hadn't been eaten. It was still there. And I was like, what in the world's going on? Because I should have had to eat my lunch, Well, I had that much missing time. When I got home and seen what time it was, there was a lot of hours missing in there. So I had heard through the grapevine that Bud Hopkins had written a book, and I didn't know who Bud Hopkins was for no one, had written a book about missing time. And I said, I've got to talk to him because this time is missing. So a friend of mine loaded up, and we drove to probably a 12-hour drive to where he was giving his lecture in Florida. And when we got there, I didn't want to go into the little conference or nothing, but I told this friend of mine, I said, go tell Bud Hopkins that Calvin Parker's out here and he wants to see him, that he's got something to talk to him about. So he went in there and told him, and Bud said, well, look, you go to, y'all go to my motel room, because apparently Bud had heard of me, and I figured he might had, because of the press. And when we got to the motel room, Bud said, I explained to him what was going on. He said, well, let me hypnotize you. Let me try to hypnotize you. I said, okay. So I had no idea. Now, until Philip come up with this tape, I had no idea that Bud had succeeded in hypnotizing me. I didn't remember nothing about it until I started reading the transcripts, some of the transcripts.
Yes.
And to this day, I hadn't read all of them yet because I'm trying to remember it before I read about it, because I don't want something like that to clog up my memory, or be remembered wrong.
Sure.
But he had put a post-hypnotic suggestions because I was so upset about the deal that I would remember it as I could remember it. But I would have bet you money that I'd never been hypnotized. Wow. And that was a long session there. And I don't know where that friend of mine is now. We just kind of more or less went different ways. But, I would love to talk to him about it if I could find him.
It's really weird because it feels sometimes that with many people who've had such strange experiences that one minute they have the encounter and then all of a sudden they seem to be pulled into the other areas, and most of which are very strange, or they call it a level of high strangeness. So Bud Hopkins, you had the distinguished pleasure of meeting him, and obviously Dr. Jelen Hynek. You've got Philip Mental, who is one of the leading top ufologists, I've got to say, in the world. He's a great guy, and he's a bit like you. He plays it down, but we really know the truth about these guys because they're great people. But when you said that you'd gone into a hypnosis regression with Bud Hopkins, do you remember what he did? Because I've always been fascinated to know about the techniques of hypnosis. It's startling to know that you're put under, and even another bigger startling realization that you can't remember anything. What was it like?
Well, I know it. The only thing I remember, he laid me right there, got me comfortable, laid me out on his bed there, and was talking about helium balloons, and that's all I remembered about it up until just a couple of months ago, and I started reading his transcripts, and he was he didn't lead me. He would ask me questions, and I would tell him. And the reason I know this because I started listening. Philip had it was just a little cassette tape, and he copied it onto a CD and sent it to me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
So I started listening to it, but when I get to the parts that I can't remember, I stop listening to it because I don't want to put anything in my head that, I want to remember it on my own.
Absolutely.
But I remembered going through the first deduction and all, and it's, pretty much like I remembered it. I kind of remembered all that. I always told everybody that I had passed out and all, and I guess in a way I didn't lie about it. I had. I just could keep my eyes open and see. But that was not to get the media off of me. That was more or less Charlie's ideal.
Yeah, and you've got to understand also that, you were put in a very difficult situation, one that required a lot of, decision making, because you had the press on your case everywhere you went. You were followed. The press would make things up about you. And what is really nice is that with regards to your book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story, is that you've put it in your words, and I think that just takes the icing off the cake. It's the icing off the cake whereby you actually explain how it happened and not someone else's version of events. I think that's pretty important.
I had a reporter here yesterday, and she pretty much said the same thing. And she said, I took this book, and if I was real open-minded, I read it with an open mind, and I believe it. I 100% believe it now. And she said, the reason why, it's in your words.
Yeah, and I think that from my reading the book as well, I was totally fascinated because I'd heard of the case many years before, and I had read a few other books that had come out at that time. But when the passage of time goes by, things quieten down, and now all of a sudden it's revived. And I know that Philip is reproducing a lot of the UFO literature that is hard to get at, which is fantastic. But I think it's more amazing that he's got you to write this book, and you have left a legacy, because it's the honest truth. And I'll say to our listeners, you really have to go out, if you haven't already, and buy this book of Calvin Parker's, because it really is a very honest account. And what I love about it, what I really love about the feel of the book, is also the conceptual artwork, which is, I've got to say, from what you've described, is some of it is not too far off the mark, especially with the robotic type creatures with the pincer hands and the very strange protrusions around their heads and the wrinkled skin. I need to ask a question, Calvin, also. When you had the initial encounter with these you call robots, I mean, although, do you believe that what they had done to you was to make you more passive so that you wouldn't become alarmed by the encounter or the experience? Is that what you feel?
Well, I thought about this the other day. I had to take my little dog to the vet. And he gets real nervous and shaky when he goes. So they would give him a little sedative to kind of knock the edge off of him a little bit so that he won't hurt himself or hurt none of them. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's a lot of the reason right there. I think they just kind of knock the edge off. They don't want you all the way out. They want you where they can get some true readings from whatever they're getting readings for. But we kind of like experiments to them, I guess. You know how people used to experiment with animals? I think that's kind of the same thing we are, because I believe that sooner or later we're all going to have to adapt and live here together on this planet, because we destroying people. The human race is destroying this planet. And I see it every day. And I look out, even just I do a lot of fishing, even just in the fishing, you go out and you look at all the plastic bags and the trash and all that stuff floating around in the water. You see what the government does, and no regulations on a lot of stuff. Look at China, all the pollution they putting out. Look at the wars and things that we're having and going through now. And I just really think that this planet is being destroyed by humans, and they're trying to keep us from doing it, because I think they're about tired of us starting over.
Yeah,
I feel like they might have just keeping up with it.
Well, I've always believed that we as a species, as a species ourselves, human species, that we're an experiment, and that they themselves are coming in to probably look and see how we're progressing, and they probably go to those people, or we call it abduct those people who are very interesting to them. And I think that listening to you, Calvin, and the way that you're speaking, and you come across as very very empathic, very gentle, very understanding. Oh, no pushover, obviously, but very understanding to the world's environment and the problems that we have at the moment. And another thing that is very much evident within these reports is that people who've had these encounters become more empathic towards human nature, to the universe, to the well-being of the environment, and so on and so forth. So, I am under the impression that this isn't the end, Calvin, as it were, with regards to us being here. So what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm pretty sure everything's going to work out pretty good at the end. I believe they're here to help with information. Somehow, we got all this knowledge that we have some way, and it would be hard to think that a man could make a sheet of steel just out of iron and not know nothing about it.
Yes.
Things like that. And I've started watching here lately now, this Ancient Alien, and have some amazing things in there. And another thing I started paying attention to, we got a little dog to come up, and I've noticed in the past few years he's got feelings better than what a human is, and he cares. I mean, he's passionate, and he probably couldn't survive on his own because I've run him, but
that's lovely.
Animals are great. I've never realized the feelings that they've had and the nature they are. Yeah. Like this little fella was jealous yesterday when all these people was in here, and he come over here and he got up in my lap while I was being interviewed. And of course, the lady that was interviewing me was a dog lover, and she asked what I want to do. I said, he's nervous. I'm going to sit here and hold him a minute. When he settles down, we'll go with the interview then. And that's just the way that I felt about it. I mean, he's family to me.
Yeah, and the animals do have especially dogs, because they are very humanized. And I think someone said over here not long ago that most humans don't deserve dogs because they are just love incarnate. They only know love. And I really find your encounter that you had amazing. I'm really honored to be speaking to you and to having you on our show. I'm just sorry that Ronnie couldn't make it because we had a slight problem with technical issues with the machinery that we have. But tell us a little bit about how people are you wanting to get in touch with you, Calvin? Do you want people to contact you through your book? Are you just someone who just wants to get on with life now? You've done your bit and you're just moving on?
Well, there's a certain amount of people that's very serious out there that need somebody to talk to. I want to be their sounding board. I've got this Facebook account set up. I don't too much ever go on it hardly, but I do go on there and I look and I read people's stories, and I see if they might need to talk to somebody, and I'll contact them or they can contact me. I have some book signings set up, and the first one is going to be in Pascagoula the day that this happened, October 11th, and it's going to be on a Thursday, the same day of the week. And there's people coming from all over the United States there.
Wow.
To visit, and I'm looking so forward to meeting these people and talking with them and visiting with them and just seeing what they have to say. Matter of fact, the lady was over here yesterday that's setting it all up, and she was telling me that they got a lot of rooms reserved here and all people just coming. I said, well, look, maybe I want to come down there an hour. If some of them's going to get here a little early, maybe I want to come down and visit with them. And I said, don't set me at a table for a book signing. Put me something I can stand up and look at them in the eye and talk to them about. So I'm looking forward to it.
So being an author is obviously something that is new to you, but I have to tell you, you've certainly written a book that is beautiful and very punchy, to the point, and as I said before, very much a little bit frightening, because you have to appreciate you were thrown into a situation that you completely threw you, and there's no way of reacting to a situation that you're not familiar with, or within an environment you don't know about. And I think from reading your book, it certainly is a case where you have been interacted with by entities from perhaps another dimension. It doesn't necessarily have to be space, but another dimension, or somewhere that we're not sure about, and that they're coming to check up on you and your friend. So I certainly believe that this is not the end of the story for you, Calvin. I really think there's a lot more to come from this. And I'm not just talking about this life, Calvin. I'm talking about future selves, or the infinite universe that we hardly understand about. So I really appreciate you coming on board, and I just want to tell the listeners that Calvin's book is Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story, and there's a foreword by Philip Mental, and this is a legitimate case, a true, honest case, and one that I've never doubted, but I was really shocked when Philip had brought your book out, and it's like, wow, that's cool, that's really nice. So how long did it take you to write the book, Calvin?
Well, I went in my room and locked the door, and I didn't come out till it was wrote. I even had them, when I ate, I had them bring food to the door. So actually, probably less than a month.
Wow. That's really good, and the other thing as well is that there's lots of photographs and artist impressions of the craft, and so that is wonderful. So I urge the people, our listeners, and the people that follow us, to go out and buy this beautiful book, and all thanks also to your good wife as well, who kind of like gave you the idea to get this out there, because you thank her a lot. I can see in the book that you thanked her a great deal with regards to.
Oh, I have.
Yeah, so she's the one who obviously set the wheels in motion for you. So do you have any plans to write another book, Calvin?
I just had to see kind of what happens along. For sure, if something happens to me or something, I will, or if I remember something that I didn't remember, or maybe just to add on to this, and maybe put an extension on to this one. So, that's all kind of up in the air right now. I was really enjoying my peaceful life. I was getting up in the mornings and going fishing for 5 days a week, coming home and cutting my yard, and I was really enjoying retirement. And believe it or not, this has been work since I've written the book. I mean, I've been here and there and just a little bit of everywhere. And I've enjoyed it, though. I've enjoyed getting out and being with the people. That's the main thing.
It's because Calvin, that your truth, you see, and what you experienced is true, and people are reaching out to you, not just you reaching out to people, but as you quite rightfully said, people are now reaching out to you because they can empathize, they can understand, they can appreciate what you've gone through, but they're also looking for answers themselves, and they see you as this person who is perhaps able to put them on the right path, or show them that you're strong, that you've got through this, because you are history. You're a bit. I don't mean it in the nasty sense. I mean that you have documented a piece of history within ufology, which is very, very important, and I think that is wonderful. And I just want to tell our listeners, that it's been a great interview. I hope you've enjoyed it, Calvin.
Oh, I have. And another thing I told them yesterday, it don't matter to me if somebody believes me or they don't, or they do believe me. But if you're in the middle of believing, buy this book and read it. In a court of law, this book would stand up in a court of law because of the evidence in it. We have documentation in there. We have eyewitnesses in there. We have professionals, and if they buy it and they read it, I think that they will believe it.
Yeah, and there's no doubting of that, Calvin, because of the evidence and the testimonies, the tape recordings, the interviews, the everything. And I'm just so proud of you to come forward and to break your story and to tell people what you've gone through. And you're a straight down to earth guy, no messing around. And I want to thank you so much. I want to thank you so much, Calvin, for coming on board. And hopefully in the future, I hope that you'll be able to come back on the program for us maybe next year sometime, and you could probably speak to my brother, who would probably examine you in a very positive way about things he's dying to know about, So
well, just any time, that'd be great with me. I'm available, so
great. Thank
you know how to get a hold of me. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. It's been nice.
Okay, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, go out and buy the book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story, Calvin Parker. And I have to say, it's a very big book, forward by Philip Mental, the British ufologist, world-renowned. And go out, buy it, spend some good money. You won't be disappointed. I just want to thank all our listeners. And you've been listening to Twin Souls Radio. God bless and good night.